The dust kicked up by Caleb McKenna's horse settled slowly in the late afternoon heat as he rode into the small town of Millbrook, Texas. It was the summer of 1885, and the frontier town looked like dozens of others he had passed through in his 32 years of wandering a main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, a saloon, a general store, a church, and not much else. What distinguished Millbrook from other towns was the palpable sense of desperation that seemed to hang in the air like the oppressive heat. Caleb was a tall, lean man with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that had grown longer than he preferred during his weeks on the trail. His clothes were dusty from travel, and his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, showed signs of the hard miles they had covered together. He wasn't planning to stay in Millbrook just long enough to resupply, rest his horse, and maybe earn a few dollars doing odd jobs before moving on to wherever the wind took him next. As he rode down Main Street, Caleb noticed that many of the storefronts were boarded up, and the few people he saw moved with the slow, defeated gait of folks who had given up hope. The recent drought had been hard on farming communities throughout Texas, and Millbrook appeared to be dying a slow death as families abandoned their failed homesteads and headed east or west in search of better opportunities. Caleb dismounted in front of Murphy's saloon and tied Belle to the hitching post. The saloon was one of the few businesses that still seemed to be operating, though even it looked like it had seen better days. As he pushed through the batwing doors, the familiar smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies greeted him. The interior was dimly lit and sparsely populated. A few local men sat at tables nursing drinks and speaking in low voices, while a tired-looking bartender wiped glasses behind the bar. Caleb approached the bar and ordered a whiskey, planning to gather information about work opportunities and the general state of the town. "You're new in town," the bartender observed as he poured Caleb's drink. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in frontier towns. "Just passing through," Caleb replied, taking a sip of the whiskey. "Looking for work? Maybe a place to rest my horse for a few days?" "Work's scarce around here," the bartender said with a shake of his head. "Most folks are pulling up stakes and heading out. Drought's been hard on everyone." "What about ranching? Cattle work?" "Big ranches are cutting back, laying off hands. Small farmers are losing their spreads to the bank." The bartender leaned closer and lowered his voice. "If you're looking for work, you might talk to Mrs. Sarah Coleman. Her husband died last month, left her with 4 young ones and a failing farm. She's been trying to find help, but most men don't want to work for a woman, especially one who can't pay much." Caleb's interest was piqued, not by the prospect of working for low wages, but by the mention of a widow struggling to care for 4 children. He had grown up without a father himself, and he knew how hard it could be for a woman alone to provide for her family. "Where might I find Mrs. Coleman?" "About 3 miles south of town. Follow the main road until you see a weathered sign for the Coleman farm. Can't miss. It's the only spread out that way that's still got people living on it." Caleb finished his drink, paid the bartender, and headed back outside. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but there was still enough daylight left to ride out to the Coleman farm. Something about the widow's situation had stirred something in him that he couldn't quite name, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his aimless wandering. The ride to the Coleman farm took him through countryside that showed the devastating effects of the drought. Fields that should have been green with crops were brown and barren, and dried creek beds told the story of a land desperate for rain. As he approached the farm, Caleb could see that it had once been a prosperous operation, but now it showed signs of neglect and financial strain. The farmhouse was a modest 2-story structure that needed paint and repairs. The barn looked sound but empty, and the few remaining chickens pecked listlessly in a yard that was more dust than grass. As Caleb rode into the yard, he saw a woman emerge from the house, shading her eyes against the setting sun as she tried to identify the stranger approaching her home. Sarah Coleman was a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the wariness in her posture, the defensive stance of someone who had learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors. "Good evening, ma'am," Caleb called out as he dismounted, keeping his hands visible and his voice respectful. "I'm Caleb McKenna. I heard in town that you might be looking for help around the farm." Sarah studied him carefully before responding. "That depends on what kind of help you're offering and what you expect in return." "Just honest work, ma'am. I'm good with horses, cattle, and general farm work. I'm not looking to take advantage of anyone, just earn my keep and maybe help out a family that could use a hand." Before Sarah could respond, 4 children appeared in the doorway behind her, ranging in age from what looked like about 12 down to maybe 4 years old. They watched the stranger with curious eyes, and Caleb could see both hope and fear in their young faces. "These are my children," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "Emma, she's 12. Then there's Matthew, who's 10, little Annie, who's 7, and Thomas, who just turned 5. They've been through enough upheaval lately, so I need to know that anyone who works here is going to be reliable and trustworthy." Caleb removed his hat and nodded respectfully to the children. "Pleased to meet you all. I understand you lost your father recently, and I'm sorry for your loss." The oldest girl, Emma, stepped forward slightly. She had her mother's auburn hair and a serious expression that suggested she had been forced to grow up quickly. "Are you going to help us save the farm?" The directness of the question caught Caleb off guard. "Well, miss, I'm going to do my best to help however I can." Sarah placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Mr. McKenna, I should be honest with you about our situation. My husband left us with debts, and the drought has made it impossible to grow crops or maintain livestock. I can offer you room and board, but I can't pay much in wages." "Room and board would be fine, ma'am. I'm not looking to get rich just to be useful." Sarah studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Caleb could see the desperation in her eyes, the burden of trying to hold everything together for her children's sake. "There's a small room above the barn that you could use," she said finally. "It's not much, but it's clean and dry. You'd take your meals with us, and I'd expect you to help with whatever needs doing around the farm. That sounds more than fair. I should warn you," Sarah continued, "this isn't going to be easy work. The well is running low, most of the livestock is gone, and the bank is threatening foreclosure. I'm not even sure we can save this place." Caleb looked around at the struggling farm, then back at the family standing before him. The children were watching him with a mixture of hope and skepticism, while Sarah waited for his response with the resigned expression of someone who expected disappointment. "Mrs. Coleman," Caleb said quietly, "I've been wandering for a long time without much purpose. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be right now. If you'll have me, I'd like to try to help you and your children keep this place." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she quickly blinked away. "Mr. McKenna, we would be grateful for your help." As the sun set behind the farmhouse, Caleb unsaddled Belle and settled her in the barn for the night. The children had warmed up to him quickly, especially young Thomas, who peppered him with questions about his horse and his travels. Emma remained more reserved, but Caleb could see that she was cautiously optimistic about having a man around to help with the heavy work. That evening, as Sarah prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Caleb assessed the farm's condition more thoroughly. The situation was indeed dire. The well was nearly dry. The fields were barren, and the few remaining animals looked underfed, but the buildings were structurally sound, and the land itself was good. It just needed rain and hard work to bring it back to life. "Mr. McKenna," Sarah said, as they sat down to eat, "I want you to know that I'm not looking for charity. I intend to pay you back for any help you give us, even if it takes time. Mrs. Coleman, sometimes helping folks is its own reward. Let's just focus on getting through each day and see what we can accomplish together." As Caleb looked around the table at the family that had welcomed him into their home, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. He had ridden into Millbrook looking for temporary work and a place to rest. Instead, he had found a family that needed him as much as he needed them. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in his adult life, Caleb McKenna felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 weeks had passed since Caleb's arrival at the Coleman farm, and the changes were already becoming apparent. The most immediate improvement was the well. Caleb had spent his first week digging it deeper and installing a more efficient pump system that he had purchased with his own savings. The increased water flow had allowed them to revive the vegetable garden and provide better care for the few remaining animals, but the changes went beyond the physical improvements to the farm. The children had embraced Caleb's presence with an enthusiasm that both touched and surprised him. Thomas, the youngest, had appointed himself as Caleb's shadow, following him around the farm and chattering constantly about everything from the chickens to the clouds in the sky. Annie, the 7-year-old, had overcome her initial shyness and now greeted Caleb each morning with a hug and a detailed report of her dreams from the night before. Matthew, the 10-year-old boy, had been hungry for male guidance and threw himself into learning everything Caleb could teach him about farm work, horse care, and basic repairs. Emma, while still somewhat reserved, had begun to relax her vigilant protection of her younger siblings and allow herself to act more like the 12-year-old she was. Sarah, meanwhile, was experiencing a transformation of her own. The constant worry and exhaustion that had marked her features when Caleb first arrived were gradually being replaced by something that looked like hope. Having someone to share the burden of running the farm and caring for the children had given her space to breathe and plan for the future instead of just surviving each day. "Caleb," Sarah said one evening as they sat on the front porch after the children had gone to bed, "I've been thinking about what we should plant in the fall if the rains come." It was the first time she had spoken about long-term plans since his arrival, and Caleb took it as a positive sign. "What did you and your husband usually grow?" "Corn, mostly, and some cotton. But I've been reading about drought-resistant crops that might do better in conditions like these. Maybe sorghum or winter wheat." "That sounds smart. Diversification is usually a good strategy." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Caleb, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why are you really here? I mean, I'm grateful beyond words for your help, but you could find better paying work elsewhere. You could have your own place instead of living above our barn. What made you stay?" Caleb considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated and involved feelings he wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge, even to himself. "I grew up without a father," he said finally. "My mother struggled to raise me and my sister alone, and I remember how hard it was for her. When I heard about your situation, I couldn't just ride away. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Caleb met her eyes and saw understanding there. "Yes, it's more than that. I've been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But being here, with you and the children, it feels like home in a way I haven't experienced since I was a boy." Sarah reached over and placed her hand on his. "The children adore you. Thomas asks every morning if you're going to stay forever. Emma told me yesterday that she feels safe for the first time since her father died. And what about you, Sarah? How do you feel?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I feel like maybe we're going to be okay. For the first time since James died, I believe we might actually make it." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Thomas crying from inside the house. Sarah started to get up, but Caleb was already on his feet. "I'll check on him," he said. "You rest." Caleb found Thomas sitting up in the bed he shared with Matthew, tears streaming down his face. The boy had been having nightmares occasionally since his father's death, and Caleb had learned that sometimes he just needed reassurance that the adults in his life weren't going to disappear. "Hey there, partner," Caleb said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Bad dream?" Thomas nodded and crawled into Caleb's lap. "I dreamed you went away and didn't come back." "Well, that's not going to happen. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. You're stuck with me, whether you like it or not." Thomas giggled through his tears. "I like it. Can you tell me a story?" Caleb settled back against the headboard and began telling Thomas about a brave, little cowboy who helped his family save their ranch from drought and bandits. By the time he finished the story, Thomas was asleep in his arms, and Matthew was listening with drowsy interest from his side of the bed. As Caleb carefully tucked Thomas back under his blanket, he felt a presence in the doorway and looked up, to see Sarah watching him with an expression of profound tenderness. "You're a natural at this," she whispered as they stepped into the hallway. "I never thought I would be. I always figured I wasn't the settling down type. Maybe you just hadn't found the right reason to settle down." The next morning brought news that would test their growing sense of security. A man in a suit arrived at the farm driving a buggy and carrying an official-looking briefcase. Caleb was working in the barn when he heard voices from the front yard and came out to investigate. "Mrs. Coleman," the man was saying, "I'm Harold Whitman from First National Bank. I'm here about the overdue payments on your mortgage." Sarah's face had gone pale, but she stood straight and faced the banker with dignity. "Mr. Whitman, I've been making partial payments when I can. The drought has made it impossible to meet the full amount. I understand the difficulties, ma'am, but the bank has been patient for months. We need to see significant progress on the debt, or we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." Caleb stepped forward, and Whitman looked at him with curiosity. "And you are?" "Caleb McKenna. I work for Mrs. Coleman. I see." "Well, Mr. McKenna, perhaps you can help Mrs. Coleman understand the seriousness of the situation. The bank needs to see at least half of the outstanding debt paid within 30 days, or we'll have to take action to protect our interests." After Whitman left, Sarah sank onto the porch steps with her head in her hands. $3,000, she said quietly. "We need $3,000 in 30 days, or we lose everything." Caleb sat beside her, his mind racing. He had some savings, but not nearly enough to cover that amount. "We'll figure something out, Sarah. There has to be a way." "Like what?" "We can't grow crops without rain, we don't have livestock to sell, and there's no other work to be found." That evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the children could sense the tension, even though Sarah tried to maintain a normal demeanor. Emma, in particular, seemed to understand that something serious was happening. "Mama," Emma said quietly, "are we going to lose the farm?" Sarah looked at her daughter's worried face and made a decision. "We're facing some challenges, sweetheart, but we're going to fight to keep our home." "Huh?" Matthew asked. Caleb looked around the table at the faces of the family he had come to love and made his own decision. "We're going to find a way to raise the money the bank wants. And if we can't raise it all, we'll raise enough to buy more time." "But how?" Annie asked. "I don't know yet," Caleb admitted. "But I promise you this, we're not giving up. This is our home, and we're going to fight for it." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Sarah sat at the kitchen table making lists and calculations, trying to find a solution to their financial crisis. "I could sell Belle," Caleb said, referring to his horse. "She's a good mare, might bring $100. Caleb, "No, you need Belle, and besides, $100 won't make much difference. Every dollar helps. And Sarah, I want you to know whatever happens with the farm, I'm not abandoning you and the children. If we lose this place, we'll find somewhere else to go, together." Sarah looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Caleb, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. We're a family now, whether the law recognizes it or not, and families stick together." As they continued to plan and hope for a miracle, neither of them noticed Emma standing in the shadows of the hallway, listening to every word and making plans of her own. The next morning would bring unexpected developments that would test their resolve and their growing bonds as a family. But for now, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The solution to their financial crisis came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the banker's ultimatum, Emma approached Caleb and her mother with a proposal that left them both speechless. "I've been thinking about the money problem," the 12-year-old said with the serious demeanor that had become her trademark since her father's death. "And I think I know how we can save the farm." Sarah and Caleb exchanged glances. They had been working frantically to find solutions, considering everything from selling their remaining possessions to Caleb taking temporary work in distant towns. But nothing seemed viable given their time constraints. "What's your idea, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store told me that her nephew in San Antonio pays good money for people who can break and train wild horses. She said he's always looking for skilled horsemen because it's dangerous work that most people won't do." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "Emma, that kind of work is extremely dangerous. Men get killed or permanently injured breaking wild horses." "But you're the best horseman I've ever seen," Emma insisted. "You gentled our old mare when everyone said she was too mean to ride. And Mrs. Henderson said her nephew pays $50 for each horse that gets properly trained." Sarah was shaking her head before Emma finished speaking. "Absolutely not. Caleb, I won't have you risking your life for money. How many horses would I need to break to raise $3,000? Caleb asked quietly. "Caleb, no," Sarah said firmly. 60 horses, Emma said quickly. "But Mrs. Henderson said they usually have groups of horses that need training, so you could do several at once." That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb and Sarah had their most serious conversation since he had arrived at the farm. "I have to at least consider it, Sarah. We're running out of options. It's too dangerous. I won't lose you too." The admission hung in the air between them, acknowledging feelings that had been growing but remained unspoken. "Sarah," Caleb said gently, "what are we to each other?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I know that I care about you more than I should. I know that the children see you as their father. I know that I can't imagine our lives without you in them. Then, you understand why I have to try this. This family, you, and the children, you're everything to me. I can't stand by and watch you lose your home. And I can't stand by and watch you get yourself killed trying to save it." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. It was unusual for anyone to visit so late in the evening, and both Caleb and Sarah approached the door with caution. Standing on their porch was Mrs. Henderson from the general store, accompanied by a well-dressed man in his 40s. "Mrs. Coleman, Mr. McKenna," Mrs. Henderson said. "I hope you'll forgive the late hour, but I wanted you to meet my nephew, Robert Henderson. He owns the horse ranch I mentioned to Emma." Robert Henderson was a tall, confident man with the bearing of someone accustomed to making quick decisions. "Mrs. Henderson told me about your situation and about Mr. McKenna's reputation with horses. I've come to make you a proposition." They invited the visitors inside, and Robert got straight to business. "I need experienced horsemen, and I'm willing to pay well for the right person. But I'm not just talking about breaking wild horses. I'm expanding my operation and need a partner, someone who can manage the day-to-day training operations while I handle the business side." "What exactly are you proposing?" Caleb asked. "A partnership. You come work for me for 1 year, and I'll pay you enough to cover your family's debt plus a substantial salary. After the year, if things work out, we can discuss a permanent partnership arrangement." Sarah felt her heart sink. A year was a long time, and San Antonio was hundreds of miles away. "There's one condition," Robert continued. "I want you to bring your family with you. I've got a large ranch with plenty of room, and I believe a man works better when his family is with him. Mrs. Coleman, I understand you have experience managing a household and children. My wife passed away 2 years ago, and I could use someone to help manage the domestic side of the ranch." The offer was more generous than anything they had dared to hope for, but it meant leaving the farm that had been their home. "We'd have to give up this place," Sarah said quietly. "Not necessarily," Robert replied. "You could rent it out or leave it in the care of a neighbor. The choice would be yours." Over the next week, the family discussed the offer extensively. The children were excited about the adventure of moving to a large ranch, but Emma was concerned about leaving the only home she had ever known. "What if we don't like it there?" she asked. "What if Mr. Henderson changes his mind about the partnership?" "Then we'll figure out something else," Caleb assured her. "But Emma, this could be the opportunity we need to secure our future. Will we still be a family?" The question came from Thomas, and it cut straight to the heart of everyone's concerns. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "No matter where we go or what we do, we'll always be a family." "But Caleb isn't really our father," Matthew pointed out with the brutal honesty of a 10-year-old. "He is in every way that matters," Emma said, surprising everyone with her fierce defense. "He takes care of us, he loves us, and he's willing to work dangerous jobs to save our home. That makes him our father." That night, Caleb found Sarah sitting on the front porch, staring out at the land her husband had worked to build into a home. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. "I keep thinking about James and how hard he worked to build this place. It feels like I'm betraying his memory by leaving." Sarah, James wanted you and the children to be safe and happy. If staying here means losing everything, that's not what he would have wanted. I know you're right. It's just ... This has been our home for so long. Home isn't a place, Sarah. It's the people you love. As long as we're together, we'll be home. Sarah turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, Caleb could see tears glistening in her eyes. Caleb, before we make this move, I need to know something. What are we to each other? Are you doing this because you feel obligated to help a widow and her children? Or is there something more? Caleb took her hands in his. Sarah, I love you. I love the children. I want to marry you and be a real father to Emma, Matthew, Annie, and Thomas. They want us to be a family in every legal and emotional sense. Even though I come with 4 children and a mountain of complications. Especially because of that, Sarah, when I rode into Millbrook, I was a drifter with no purpose and no roots. You and the children gave me something to live for. Something to fight for. I don't want to just help you. I want to build a life with you. Sarah leaned forward and kissed him gently. Then yes. Let's go to San Antonio. Let's take Robert's offer and see what kind of future we can build together. 2 weeks later, the Coleman family, soon to be the McKenna family, loaded their belongings into a wagon and prepared to leave for their new life. The farm had been rented to a young couple who promised to care for it until the family decided whether to return permanently. As they drove away from the only home the children had ever known, Emma looked back with tears in her eyes. It's okay to be sad about leaving, Caleb told her. But remember, we're not just leaving something behind, we're heading towards something new. Will you really marry Mama? Annie asked from her perch beside Caleb on the wagon seat. If she have me, Caleb replied with a smile. She'll have you, Thomas declared with the confidence of a 5-year-old. She loves you. We all do. 6 months later, Caleb and Sarah were married in a small ceremony at the ranch in San Antonio. The partnership with Robert Henderson had proven successful beyond their wildest dreams, and they were already discussing the possibility of eventually buying their own ranch. The children had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. Emma had blossomed in the more social environment of the larger ranch. Matthew had discovered a talent for working with cattle. Annie had made friends with the other children on neighboring ranches, and Thomas had appointed himself as Caleb's official assistant in all horse-related activities. On their wedding day, as Caleb looked out at his new family, his wife and 4 children, who had legally taken his name, he reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He had ridden into Millbrook as a lonely drifter looking for temporary work. He was leaving Texas as a married man with 4 children and a bright future ahead of him. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked him as they stood together watching their children play in the yard after the wedding ceremony. Regret what? Giving up your freedom? Taking on a ready-made family? All the complications that come with us? Caleb pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Sarah, the day I met you and the children was the day my real life began. I wouldn't change a single thing about our journey together. As the sun set over the Texas landscape, Caleb McKenna, husband, father, and partner, knew that he had found exactly what he had been searching for all those years on the trail. He had walked into town a solitary cowboy and left with a widow, and 4 kids who had become his whole world, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The end.